just why is it that physiotherapy isn't working for you or other conventional methods of pain management are working for you? Personally, I think the crux of the issue is that we need to first of all understand what pain is in of itself, and by extension define how acute and chronic pain are very different from one another, as is their solutions. So pain, I would argue, is a protection mechanism, and I think you can kind of extrapolate that definition from whatever you look up. So this is probably like the first thing you'll see on Google, something along the lines of, "Oh, pain is the nervous system responding to like stimuli. Basically, that's harmful." And really, I'm saying it's a protection mechanism because, generally speaking, when there is physical tissue damage present, pain is more just trying to say, "Hey, lay off that area." And this is more obvious when we're talking about acute pain, which I'd say is short lasting, is kind of how it's generally defined. But I'd also argue that acute pain, more often than not, and this is a part that's usually left out of most definitions, is more about there being an obvious cause and effect to some kind of problem, right? I mean, sometimes that can exist with chronic pain, but more like physical and actionable stuff. So, not something like a long lasting illness that contributes to chronic pain, more like you did something and now there's a consequence because you did something. So maybe you were walking when it was icy or wet and you slipped and fell and bunged up your knee. Maybe you tried to lift heavy winter tires onto like a tire rack and your garage is overhead. You bunged up your shoulder. Maybe you were playing like some kind of athletic sport like pickleball and you twisted your back weird and now your back is bunged up, etc., etc. There is a cause and there is an effect. And that's really how I'd say acute pain is defined. Cause and effect, just to repeat myself. It's more obvious what the issue is, it's short lasting, and I think that the physiotherapeutic model for this of rehabilitation, as in isolated inhibition and isolated facilitation, is good. I think for people with acute pain, it makes sense to do isolated strengthening and some kind of isolated inhibitory activity. So, like foam rolling or stretching, and then making sure you have isolated strengthening for muscles that seem weaker, right? That makes sense for acute pain. The problem is that, in personal experience, I'd say physios all more often than not treat acute pain the same as chronic pain when there is a very large difference between the two. And the biggest misconception about chronic pain is that people don't seem to understand that sometimes in chronic pain, this is very common, there is no physical tissue damage left. There's nothing left to rehabilitate or heal. That doesn't mean the muscle doesn't exist. It just means that it's not actually physically damaged. The brain is just sending pain signals there because it's paranoid about further harming that area. It's further about recreating that. It's like if you took the kind of story parents would tell their kids about not touching the stove because it's hot as a kid, but without the stove, your hand just hurts for some reason sometimes. Your brain senses certain things as like, oh, okay, we're going to flare up and make sure that this guy knows don't do that. And that's kind of where chronic pain differentiates itself, where it becomes more complex because it's much more a problem of this than everything you see on screen here, besides my legs, of course, because that's not really in frame. But really, I'm saying it's more of a brain issue than a body issue. And when neurology is introduced into physiotherapeutic practices, it's more often than not passive, which isn't very good. It's a start, but at the end of the day, you want something active. You need your brain to actively adapt to new scenarios and change. That's the biggest thing. Like when I went to a physiotherapist myself for lower back issues that I was having before I started doing postural restoration techniques to solve that problem for me, they told me to do needling or whatever. And needling, it feels good. It loosens stuff up temporarily, but it's not a long-term solution. And it's the same with stretching. It's the same with certain isolated strengthening movements for people with chronic pain, because sometimes you're just stuck in certain positions constantly and it's just going to go back to the way it was. The brain gets comfortable in certain positions and decides we're going to stay over here, which is like right dominant pattern, left AIC, right BC in postural restoration, versus moving over here, which would be left AIC, right, nope, not left AIC, right AIC, left BC pattern, which is a good thing. That's what we want in postural restoration. And what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it's not as simple as it seems. The chronic pain, especially in the context of people I see, is more because of positional issues, and the reason physio isn't working with those people is because they're doing things while stuck in a certain position that's not going to allow inhibition and facilitation of what they're trying to upregulate and downregulate to actually occur. They're going to be doing these exercises, but they're still going to be stuck in the pattern that's causing their chronic pain in the first place. They need to get out of the pattern. They need to establish left AFIR, get into left stance, and establish a left ZOA, which is basically just diaphragmatic breathing volume, for lack of a better term, so how well it moves and also how much air you can get into your body. That's kind of a discussion for another time, but hopefully that gives you some semblance of differences between chronic pain and acute pain.